For the first time in American history, Congress has referred a former president for criminal prosecution. The January 6th committee held its final public meeting this afternoon. The panel is wrapping up its 18-month investigation into the Capitol attack and voted to approve the referral of multiple federal crimes. Jamil Jaffer joins us now to give us some more perspective. He is the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute and a former associate White House counsel to President George W. Bush. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for being willing to share your expertise. The committee, as you know, recommended a criminal referral against the former president for obstructing an official proceeding, conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to make a false statement, and inciting an insurrection. The Department of Justice does not have to act, but do you think it will? And if so, might it be on any specific charge?
Well, it's a great question, Lisa. As you know, the Justice Department is already investigating some of the issues related to January 6th and the former president's involvement with those issues. What you now have happening is Congress recommending these charges. The Justice Department, as you correctly point out, doesn't have to do anything, but because they have an ongoing investigation, what they're likely to do is to take this evidence that the January 6th committee has gathered, look at it, and assess whether any of these charges that have been recommended by the January 6th committee in an unprecedented manner, as you rightly point out, should be brought against the former president or other folks that they've recommended, like John Eastman and other folks involved in the lead up to and the events of January 6th.
These aren't just referrals and they're not official charges, at least not yet. But this is pretty serious, right?
Yeah, it's astounding. I mean, we've never seen this kind of activity before, a committee of the House of Representatives recommending charges against a former president. Now, that being said, of course, typically the way you'd see these type of things pursued would be through an impeachment proceeding. And we have seen that in the past. We've actually seen that on this very issue with this president and ultimately a successful impeachment in the House. Was not able to succeed in getting a conviction in the Senate, while a majority of senators did vote for impeachment, not enough to convict the president. So now the committee's done more investigation, and now they're recommending criminal charges against the former president.
Should the former president be worried at this point?
Well, certainly I think he ought to be nervous. Now, the question, of course, Lisa, is politically, will this hurt him or harm him, hurt him or benefit him? You know, a lot of folks who support the former president say this is just another example of a committee set out to get him and a Justice Department that has him in his sights. And as a result, they're not likely to be swayed. The question is, will other Americans be swayed? And ultimately, will the Republican Party be swayed? Because, of course, the former president now is a candidate for presidency of the Republican Party or to be the nominee of the Republican Party here for the 2024 elections.
For Republicans called to testify, kind of stood their ground and didn't really, answer questions, pleaded the fifth. How do they factor into all of this? And do you think they should be held accountable as well?
Well, certainly the committee is recommending charges against some of those folks, or at least suggest the Justice Department should look into it. John Eastman is one. The former Assistant Attorney General Jeffrey Clark, who the president thought about appointing as acting Attorney General, is also one of the people named. There are a few other folks as well. So we'll see what happens with those folks going forward. Of course, a number of Republicans, former staffers of the president, did come and testify and cooperate with the committee and describe what happened there in the Oval Office in the days leading up to the day of January 6th, describing the president's state of mind and his decision to not do anything as the violence proceeded at the Capitol.
Yeah, it was a short meeting today, but pretty riveting. What stood out to you most about the revelations from the committee's final public meeting this afternoon?
Well, in a lot of ways, Lisa, this was a sort of a closing argument for the prosecution. The committee itself, was very clear about its objective from day one, which was to identify those responsible and hold them accountable. So there wasn't really a defense in that committee. It was made up of 7 Democrats, 2 Republicans, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. And so they laid out their case for all what they had found, and what they determined were the facts, which were specifically that the president was responsible for what happened on January 6th, along with a number of his other associates. And so they've now recommended charges to the Justice Department. So I think the most interesting thing about this is the decision by the committee, Lisa, to recommend that the Justice Department, in fact, file charges.
And overall, what's your assessment of the January 6th committee's work?
Well, look, the January 6th committee interviewed lots of witnesses. They obtained a lot of new evidence, things that we didn't know about. For example, that the president told his own staff that day at the ellipse that he knew those folks that were armed near the Capitol were not there to harm him. And then he called upon them, knowing that they were armed, to go to the Capitol. That, I think, is a pretty important fact when you look at the question of whether the president should be held culpable or not for what happened that day. The fact they knew that they were armed and still called for them to go to the Capitol.
The committee's work alone, do you think, will go down in history, in the history books?
Well, there's no doubt it'll go down in history books. The question is, how will it be seen? Of course, the impeachment having taken place, the president now being out of office, but still running for office. We'll see what happens going forward. But obviously, a disastrous day that day, January 6th, and a day that should be an embarrassment for all Americans who watch it happen. And a lesson to all of us that these things can't happen in America. We believe in elections and free and fair elections, and that's what we need to uphold as a nation.
Jamil Jaffer, thank you so much for your expertise and your insight today. Thank you for joining us.